Vladimir Putin likes to present himself as a strong leader
that has absolute control over Russia.
The list of your political opponents who are dead, imprisoned, or jailed is long.
But recently, the Putin's facade is falling apart.
So my question is, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Putin began his grip on power in 1999. He holds it even today, not because people love him, but because anyone who dared to challenge him was silenced in mysterious ways. Except one person, who vowed to overthrow him from power. It's the late 2000s, and a strange person suddenly started dominating the headlines. He was fighting Putin, not with weapons and treason, but with facts and logic. He soon had thousands of loyal supporters, so much that many of them did not even fear losing their lives for him. He started becoming too dangerous to ignore, and Putin knew it was time to erase him from the path. Putin used nasty techniques to eliminate him. But strangely, he survived almost all of them because he was too smart, smarter than anyone expected. This legend was named Alexei Navalny. Now, his name will piss off some people, and they're gonna try to downvote this video in the algorithm. Except you can help us avoid that by clicking on the like button. Thank you. Navalny began his political activism in 2004 with a movement against excessive development in Moscow, then gradually shifted focus toward exposing corruption within state-owned enterprises. By 2008, he had gained prominence for his investigations into corruption at Gazprom and Rosneft, publishing detailed findings through his blog and media platforms. In 2010, Navalny founded Rospil, an anti-corruption initiative managed by lawyers that scrutinized government spending and challenged misconduct in courts. This organization laid the groundwork for his more ambitious project. In 2011, he established the Anti-Corruption Foundation, known as FBK. And remember that name, the FBK, because that would go on to become Putin's biggest nightmare. The FBK became the primary vehicle for his investigations into corruption among Russia's political elite, and found a simple but genius way to spread the message quickly. FBK produced meticulously researched exposés distributed primarily on YouTube, garnering tens and eventually hundreds of millions of views, all while bypassing the Kremlin's total control of traditional mass media. The only problem for the regime was that these weren't some local-level exposés. The FBK published major investigative documentaries that struck directly at the regime's core. In 2015, the Chaika investigation linked Prosecutor General Yuri Chaika's sons to organized crime and fraud. In 2017, a documentary named He Is Not Diamond to You exposed former Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev's alleged corruption. He led massive anti-government protests across Russia. The demonstrations he held in 2018 resulted in 257 arrests nationwide when police detained participants to prevent unauthorized gatherings. Physical protests were easily controlled, and Navalny knew that. So he started putting his efforts back into the methods where Putin was powerless. And soon, he came up with a nasty surprise. On the 19th of January, 2021, just 2 days after Navalny's defiant return to Russia and his immediate arrest at the airport, his team released what would become the most explosive investigation into Russian opposition history. The 2-hour documentary titled Putin's Palace: History of the World's Largest Bribe. It was narrated by Navalny himself, recorded before his departure, and released while he sat in jail facing an uncertain fate. The investigation alleged the existence of a secret compound on the Black Sea coast near Galinchik, built exclusively for Vladimir Putin at a cost of $1.35 billion. Based on leaked architectural plans, invoices, and whistleblower testimony, the documentary revealed what Navalny called the largest bribe in history, an elaborate corruption scheme involving Putin's inner circle of oligarchs, state oil chiefs, and billionaires, who funded the construction in exchange for lucrative contracts. The scale of the property was staggering. The estate covered 7,800 hectares, roughly 19,300 acres, making it 39 times the size of the Principality of Monaco. The main residence alone spanned 17,691 square meters. Aerial footage revealed a cream-colored 2-story mansion in classical style, connected by mountain tunnels directly to the Black Sea below. The investigation documented every tiny detail no one could have imagined. It exposed $824 toilet brushes and equally expensive toilet paper holders installed throughout the palace. These absurdly expensive items transformed into powerful symbols of how thoroughly disconnected Putin's inner circle had become from the reality most Russians face daily. This documentary's impact was immediate and unprecedented. Within the first 2 hours of publication, it reached nearly 3 million views. Within a week, the video surpassed 93 million views, and it has since been viewed over 134 million times, making it one of the most watched political exposés in history. The investigation sparked the largest nationwide protest Russia had seen in years, erupting in over 100 cities across the country. In a potent act of symbolic mockery, demonstrators marched through the streets waving golden toilet brushes in the air. The Kremlin just had one option: to watch everything silently. The exposé was so damaging that it forced Vladimir Putin to personally and angrily address the allegations, something he rarely did for opposition claims. He stated categorically that nothing listed in the investigation had ever belonged to him or his close relatives. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov dismissed the allegations as old news, claiming Putin owned no such palace. It's all thanks to Navalny and his luck that made this exposé possible, because if that luck hadn't existed, Navalny would have lost his battle against death, or I would say, a mysterious death. 5 months before the palace investigation shook Russia, the Kremlin had already tried to solve its Navalny problem permanently. On August 20th, 2022, Navalny became violently ill during a flight from Tomsk in Siberia to Moscow. Images of his agonizing screams from the aircraft shocked the world. After an emergency landing in Omsk and a tense standoff where his supporters accused officials of trying to buy time for the poison to dissipate, Navalny was airlifted in a coma to Berlin's Charité hospital. Within days, 5 laboratories certified by the Organization of the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons confirmed what many suspected. On September 2nd, 2022, the German government announced it had clear proof that Navalny had been poisoned with Novichok, a Soviet-era military-grade nerve agent. France, Sweden, and the OPCW all independently verified the finding. The use of Novichok was a direct fingerprint of the Russian state, identical to the weapon used in the 2018 poisoning of former Russian spy Sergei Skripal in the United Kingdom. The Kremlin's response was predictable: denial. Russian officials repeatedly claimed that no poisoning had occurred and suggested Navalny was working for the CIA. But what came next turned the attempted assassination into one of the most remarkable investigative journalism coups of the 21st century. On December 14th, 2020, a joint investigation by Bellingcat, The Insider, CNN, and Der Spiegel published voluminous evidence implicating Russia's FSB in the assassination attempt. Using Russia's porous black market for flight manifests and phone metadata, the investigators uncovered an entire FSB unit comprising approximately 15 operatives with backgrounds in chemical and biological warfare, medicine, and special operations. This clandestine poison squad from the FSB Criminalistics Institute has been shadowing Navalny since 2017, traveling with him on more than 30 overlapping flights. The investigation tracked 3 specific operatives: Alexei Alexandrov, Ivan Osipov, and Vladimir Panyev, who traveled to Tomsk where Navalny was ultimately poisoned. Mobile phone data placed them within minutes away from Navalny's hotel at the critical time. The European Union later concluded that such a complex operation was possible only with the consent of the Presidential Executive Office, meaning approval from the very top of Russian power. The evidence suggested that there had been earlier attempts. In July of 2020, Navalny's wife, Yulia, fell suddenly ill during a trip to Kaliningrad, finding it nearly impossible to stand up, with recovery occurring only the next morning. 3 members of that FSB squad had booked flights to Kaliningrad when the couple traveled there, and phone records showed they spoke multiple times with FSB Colonel Makshikov just before their flights. And the FSB sometimes used weird ways to try to eliminate Navalny. One of them was the underpants. Navalny was usually one step ahead of the FSB, and the most damning evidence came from Navalny himself in an audacious undercover operation. On December 21st, 2020, while recuperating in Germany, Navalny called an FSB operative identified as Konstantin Khodorkovsky. Disguising his phone number and posing as an aide to the Security Council chief, Navalny requested information for an official report on the failed operation. The 49-minute conversation, recorded with Bellingcat journalists present as witnesses, contained shocking admissions. When Navalny asked what item of clothing was the emphasis on and what was the most risky piece, Khodorkovsky simply replied, "the underpants," specifying that the nerve agent had been applied on the inside, the crotch area, at Navalny's hotel in Tomsk. Khodorkovsky also explained that his unit had not expected the pilot to make an emergency landing in Omsk. He attributed Navalny's survival to 2 factors beyond their control: pilots rerouting the flight for an emergency landing, and Siberian doctors administering an antidote almost immediately. He confessed that the unit had been sent to Omsk to recover Navalny's clothes so they could be treated to remove traces of Novichok before independent experts could test them. The FSB later dismissed the recording as a provocation and a forgery, claiming it would have been impossible without organizational and technical support of foreign special services. But Bellingcat had arranged for representatives to be present during the call, creating direct witnesses in addition to the published audio and visual records. The failed assassination became proof that Russia possessed deadly weapons and that opposition to the Kremlin carried mortal risks. But most remarkably, Navalny chose to return, knowing that the Russian state had tried to kill him, knowing that FSB operatives had shadowed him for years, and knowing that his survival was accidental rather than evidence of any protection. On January 17, 2021, he boarded a flight back to Russia. He was arrested the moment he passed through passport control at Moscow Sheremetyevo Airport on charges of violating parole terms from a 2014 fraud conviction, a case he had always maintained was politically motivated and which the European Court of Human Rights had ruled violated fair trial rights. What followed was his systematic destruction through the Russian legal system. He was shuttled between courts and penal colonies, his legal team systematically arrested, and his sentence continuously extended on charges that became increasingly absurd. He was ultimately given a 19-year sentence for extremism and terrorism, charges he widely condemned internationally as retribution for his political activities. He spent a cumulative 283 to 300 days in solitary confinement across 27 separate periods, instruments of psychological degradation designed to break him. In December of 2023, his lawyers lost contact with him for nearly 3 weeks. He had disappeared from the prison system, only to re-emerge at FKU IK3, known as the Polar Wolf Penal Colony in Karp. It's located in the Yamalo-Nenets region, 1,200 miles from Moscow, and 40 miles north of the Arctic Circle. On December 26, 2023, after his transfer, Navalny managed to post to social media, "I'm your new Santa Claus. I now live in the Arctic Circle." It seems funny, except the most shocking news came just 2 months later. On February 16, 2024, Russia's prison service announced that 47-year-old Navalny had died. The official story was that he felt ill after a walk and almost immediately lost consciousness. Prison authorities reported he had taken a short walk, said he felt unwell and collapsed without regaining consciousness. The state later claimed his death resulted from natural causes or sudden death syndrome linked to heart arrhythmia, but people were not buying that story. The circumstances surrounding his death immediately raised serious questions. On the 15th of February 2024, the day before his reported death, Navalny had appeared via video link at a court hearing, making jokes and appearing to be in good health. An inmate at Polar Wolf noted highly unusual activity on the evening of February 15th, including what appeared to be a surprise prison inspection, with prisoners locked in their barracks and searches conducted on the morning of February 16th. The prisoner reported that inmates were informed of Navalny's death at 10 a.m., well before the official press release at 16:19, which was 14:19 Moscow time. According to human rights group Gulagu.net, an official report stated that several cameras in the penal colony were inactive on February 16th. This was interpreted as resulting from FSB officers arriving on February 14th and disabling audio and video monitoring equipment. Gulagu.net documented bruises on Navalny's body, which medical examiners were allegedly told to attribute to post-mortem injuries. His widow, Yulia Navalnaya, immediately accused Vladimir Putin of murdering her husband. On September 17, 2024, she made a dramatic announcement. According to her video statement, supporters had managed to obtain and smuggle biological samples from her late husband out of Russia. These samples were sent to independent laboratories in 2 different countries. She claimed both analyses reached the same conclusion. Alexei was killed. More specifically, he was poisoned. She alleged the laboratories had refused to release the findings due to unspecified political concerns. Navalnaya's team stated that they had collected testimony from 5 staff members at the Karp colony. These accounts contradicted the official narrative, describing Navalny complaining of burning pain in his chest and abdomen, having a severe cough, groaning in pain, and experiencing convulsions in the hours before his death. Previously unseen photographs, said to be taken inside his cell after his death, reportedly showed vomit and blood on the floor. The Russian state offered no credible explanation for why a physically active 47-year-old opposition leader would suddenly die in apparent good health. The global community responded with disbelief. But inside Russia, the message was clear. Challenge the fortress, expose its corruption, refuse to be intimidated, and the regime will find a way to eliminate you, no matter how long it takes or how obvious the murder appears. Navalny's death didn't end the Kremlin's paranoia. It unleashed something far more terrifying, a nationwide campaign of vengeance, targeting anyone who dared to remember him or had ever supported his work. On February 16, 2024, when news of Navalny's death spread, something spontaneous happened across Russia that the Kremlin couldn't tolerate. Thousands of citizens in dozens of cities began laying flowers at monuments dedicated to victims of political repression, like the Solovetsky Stone in Moscow. These weren't organized protests, but quiet acts of grief. Ordinary people paying respects to a man who had exposed the corruption devouring their country. The state's response was immediate and brutal. According to the Independent Human Rights Monitoring Group, OVD Info, more than 400 people were detained in at least 36 cities during the first 3 days after his death, making it the largest wave of political arrests since the September 2022 protests against military mobilization. This wasn't policing, it was punishment. Courts worked overnight to process mourners. In St. Petersburg alone, at least 154 people received administrative jail sentences of up to 14 days for the crime of laying flowers. Individual cases illustrated the brutality. One man in Surgut was allegedly tortured at a police station for laying flowers, beaten, and having a gun pointed at his head. A priest suffered a stroke after police arrested him while attempting to hold a memorial service. One human rights activist was sentenced to 10 days of administrative detention for attempting to honor Navalny's memory. The authorities deemed these quiet acts of remembrance threats to public order. This terror became permanent. On February 16, 2025, the first anniversary of Navalny's death, Russian law enforcement detained at least 42 people at memorial gatherings, demonstrating that even a year later, the Kremlin maintained its unrelenting campaign against any public expression of sympathy. But the crackdown on mourners was only the visible surface of something far more sinister unfolding beneath. The regime launched a nationwide hunt for anyone who had ever financially supported Navalny's anti-corruption foundation. And they were using 21st century surveillance technology combined with Soviet-style collective punishment to terrorize an entire generation. In June of 2021, Moscow City Court declared the Anti-Corruption Foundation an extremist organization, a ruling that came into force on August 4th. The very next day, on August 5th, Navalny's team launched a new donation drive using the US-based payment system Stripe, believing that the platform would be secure and that Stripe wouldn't cooperate with Russian security services. But on the first day of the campaign, a portion of the foundation's website address appeared in some donors' bank statements, immediately exposing a critical vulnerability. Security services analyzing these early bank statements identified other common transaction markers, most importantly, a unique merchant ID that Stripe used to route payments. This discovery significantly widened the pool of potential suspects, transforming what could have been a limited investigation into a nationwide dragnet. As of October of 2025, the investigative outlet Mediazona tracked at least 114 criminal cases for financing extremism based on past donations to the foundation, compiled from court records, press releases from law enforcement agencies, and information provided by the defendants themselves. The targets weren't hardened political activists, but regular people, teachers, programmers, folklorists, private citizens who had donated modest sums, believing they were supporting legitimate anti-corruption work. What happened to Navalny followed the exact same pattern as another Putin critic before him, Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Their goal was the same, but their paths were not. In 1989, Khodorkovsky founded Bank Minitep, which became one of the first private banks in post-Soviet Russia. During the chaotic 1990s privatization process, when state assets were being sold off for fractions of their value, Khodorkovsky amassed considerable wealth through currency and commodity trading. In 1995, Minitep acquired Yukos, Russia's second-largest oil company, for approximately $350 million in a privatization auction. It proved to be an extraordinarily lucrative investment. Khodorkovsky modernized Yukos by hiring McKinsey & Company to restructure management and implementing transparent accounting systems through PricewaterhouseCoopers. Combined with rising oil prices, these reforms transformed Yukos into an enormously profitable enterprise, pumping nearly 2 million barrels of oil per day. By 2003, Khodorkovsky had become Russia's wealthiest individual with a fortune estimated between $15 to $16 billion, ranking him approximately 16th on Forbes' Global Billionaires list. Yukos proclaimed itself as the foremost proponent of westernization in the Russian oil industry, distinguished by its corporate transparency. But unlike most Russian oligarchs who had accumulated wealth through Kremlin connections and maintained careful political neutrality, Khodorkovsky made a fateful decision. He openly challenged Putin's dominance. In 2001, he founded Open Russia, a reform-minded civil society organization dedicated to building and strengthening civil society in Russia. He funded opposition political parties, including Yabloko, the Union of Right Forces, and initially even the Communist Party, while deliberately excluding Putin's United Russia from his support. He gained control of a respected newspaper and used his wealth to support independent journalism and academic programs. These decisions marked Khodorkovsky as fundamentally different from other oligarchs, who viewed wealth primarily as a means to personal consumption and power, not as a tool for political change. He had broken Putin's unwritten rule for oligarchs. You can keep your wealth, but you must stay completely out of politics. The Kremlin viewed his actions as a direct threat, an independent power base using vast resources to challenge the regime's monopoly on political organization. On July 2, 2003, Khodorkovsky's business associate was arrested in a Moscow hospital where he was receiving treatment, charged with fraud and tax evasion. Many observers interpreted the arrest as a clear warning to Khodorkovsky to flee the country before facing similar charges. But Khodorkovsky refused, famously stating, "I will not become a political exile." On October 25, 2003, in a scene that would define the Putin era, armed Russian commandos stormed a Yukos chartered plane refueling at Novosibirsk airport in Siberia, arresting Khodorkovsky at gunpoint. He was ostensibly being arrested to appear as a witness in investigations underway in Moscow, but within hours after delivery to authorities, he was charged with fraud, tax evasion, and other economic crimes. The timing proved politically significant, preceding Russia's December 2003 parliamentary election and March 2004 presidential election, effectively eliminating Khodorkovsky from active political engagement. The first trial from 2004 to 2005 charged Khodorkovsky with fraud related to allegedly illegal acquisition of a stake in the state-owned fertilizer firm Appetit in 1994. Despite many procedural violations, Khodorkovsky was convicted in 2005 and sentenced to 9 years in prison, later reduced to 8. While Khodorkovsky sat in a Siberian penal colony, the government escalated its assault on Yukos itself. The state claimed Yukos owed $28 billion in back taxes and moved to seize its assets. The company's main production unit was sold off in what observers called a murky forced sale at a bargain basement price of $9.4 billion, a fraction of its actual value, to a shady Russian front company. The shell group was quickly absorbed by the state-owned giant Rosneft. Yukos was ultimately forced into bankruptcy in 2006. But the Kremlin wasn't finished. In December of 2010, while Khodorkovsky was still imprisoned from his first conviction, the state put him on trial a second time alongside his business associate. They were charged with stealing 350 million tons of oil, essentially all the oil that Yukos had produced under their management over 6 years. Khodorkovsky was again convicted and his sentence extended, ultimately serving 10 years total. When questioned about the severity of the sentence, Putin went on live television and stated, "A thief must be in jail," comparing Khodorkovsky to convicted American fraudster Bernard Madoff. The message to Russia's elite was unmistakable. No one, no matter how rich or powerful, was independent of Putin. In December of 2013, after serving his full decade, Putin suddenly pardoned Khodorkovsky, citing his mother's illness as justification. The timing, just months before the Sochi Winter Olympics, suggested a PR gesture to appease Western audiences. According to accounts, Khodorkovsky was provided a parka and a passport and immediately flown to Germany, effectively exiled from Russia. International courts eventually vindicated his claims of persecution. The European Court of Human Rights ruled that Russian authorities had violated his human rights in multiple respects. More significantly, former Yukos shareholders won a $50 billion arbitration award at The Hague, with the court finding that Russia had systematically violated the Energy Charter Treaty and manipulated its legal system to destroy Yukos. Russia has never paid this award. The fates of Navalny and Khodorkovsky aren't isolated tragedies, but part of a systematic 20-year state policy of intimidation, assassination, and mysterious deaths, targeting anyone who poses a credible threat to the regime's power. At least 10 prominent Putin critics have died in assassinations or suspicious circumstances since he came to power, creating a pattern of poisoning, shootings, falls from windows, and plane crashes that reveals a clear evolution, from covert operations blamed on rogue actors to overt state-sanctioned killings celebrated with public impunity. On February 27, 2015, Boris Nemtsov, a leading opposition politician and former deputy prime minister, was shot 4 times in the back while walking across a bridge within sight of the Kremlin in Moscow. He died just hours after appealing for support for a march against Russia's war in Ukraine, and international observers recognized his murder as a turning point in Putin's willingness to directly assassinate high-profile critics. 5 Chechens were eventually arrested and convicted of involvement in the murder, but the identity of who ordered the killing remained officially unanswered, despite widespread suspicion pointing to the Kremlin. Then, in 2022, a joint investigation by Bellingcat, The Insider, and BBC Eye Investigations revealed the truth. Using the same methods that exposed Navalny's poisoners, they discovered that an FSB agent from the secret assassination squad at the FSB's Criminalistics Institute, the same unit later implicated in poisoning Navalny, Vladimir Kara-Murza and Dmitry Baikov, had been tracking Nemtsov across Russia for months. Travel data placed this surveillance team in proximity to Nemtsov on at least 13 separate trips before the shooting occurred. Anna Politkovskaya represented another chilling case. The 48-year-old investigative journalist for the independent newspaper Novaya Gazeta spent 7 years covering the Second Chechen War and became renowned for documenting human rights abuses by Russian military forces. Her reporting repeatedly drew the wrath of Russian authorities, and she faced detention, threats, forced exile, and poisoning during her career. She had titled her book Putin's Russia, marking her stance unmistakably clear. In September of 2004, while on a flight to cover the Beslan school hostage crisis, she drank tea and lost consciousness, hospitalized with what colleagues believed was poisoning, though the toxin was never definitively identified because medical staff were instructed to destroy her blood tests. Then on October 7th, 2006, Putin's 54th birthday, she was shot dead in the elevator of her Moscow apartment building. At the time of her death, she was preparing a story on alleged torture in Chechnya. The regime's handling of her murder revealed its contemptuous impunity. 4 men were initially charged, but all acquitted. After years of flawed investigations, 5 men were eventually convicted in 2014, but the mastermind was never identified. Then, in November of 2023, the story took a grotesque turn. One of the convicted murderers, a former police officer who had been sentenced to 20 years, was granted a presidential pardon by Vladimir Putin as a reward for signing a contract to fight in Russia's invasion in Ukraine. Alexander Litvinenko's case marked perhaps the most brazen state assassination in modern history. A former FSB agent who defected to the United Kingdom in 2000, Litvinenko became a vocal critic, accusing the FSB of plotting to kill oligarch Boris Berezovsky and co-authoring a book that accused the agency of bombing Russian apartment buildings in 1999 to justify the Chechen War. In mid-October 2006, Litvinenko fell ill in London after drinking tea, suffering from vomiting, abdominal pain, and bloody diarrhea. He died an agonizing death 22 days later on November 23rd. From his deathbed, he accused Vladimir Putin of ordering his assassination. Then the truth came out. A massive investigation by British authorities found he had been poisoned with polonium-210, a rare and incredibly lethal radioactive isotope that is virtually impossible to procure outside of a state-level nuclear reactor. The poison had been administered to him in a cup of tea at a London hotel meeting with 2 Russian contacts. The polonium was traced back to a nuclear reactor in Russia's Urals and processed through an FSB laboratory. These cases reveal a deliberate 2-phase strategy. The first phase is the act of assassination itself, eliminating the threat. The second phase, perhaps more psychologically potent, is the public celebration of impunity. As of early March 2025, the independent human rights group OVD Info has confirmed at least 1,566 political prisoners currently held in Russia. The United Nations estimates the true figure exceeds 2,000. In total, OVD Info is tracking over 2,930 individuals currently facing politically motivated criminal persecution, meaning nearly 3,000 Russians are either imprisoned or under investigation simply for their political views or actions opposing the regime. In 2024 alone, at least 15 political prisoners died in custody, a list that doesn't even include Alexei Navalny, whose February 2024 death in the Arctic penal colony made international headlines but represented just one death among many that received no global attention. For 23 years, Putin prepared for a Western-backed revolution. But on June 23, 2023, the threat came from his own man, Yevgeny Prigozhin, Putin's chef and commander of the Wagner Group mercenary army. For 23 years, Putin prepared for a Western-backed revolution. But on June 23, 2023, the threat came from his own man, Yevgeny Prigozhin, Putin's chef and commander of the Wagner Group mercenary army. After months of publicly blaming Defense Minister Shoigu and Chief of Staff Gerasimov for military incompetence and the deaths of his men in Bakhmut, Prigozhin posted a message on Telegram. "There are 25,000 of us, and we are coming to sort things out." Wagner forces seized Russia's southern military district headquarters in Rostov-on-Don without firing a shot, then raced towards Moscow in a march of justice. When Russian aircraft tried to stop them, Wagner shot down at least 13, killing over a dozen pilots, and then advanced to within 200 kilometers of the capital, while Putin denounced the rebellion as treason on national television. After 36 hours, Belarusian dictator Lukashenko brokered a deal where Prigozhin would halt his march in exchange for amnesty and exile to Belarus. On June 27th, charges were dropped, and 2 days later, Putin forced Prigozhin and 35 Wagner commanders to apologize in the Kremlin while seizing all his assets. But analysts called him a dead man walking, because the public humiliation could not go unanswered. Exactly 2 months later, on August 23rd, Prigozhin's jet exploded mid-flight, killing all 10 people on board, including Wagner's entire top leadership. Western intelligence assessed it as assassination by bomb, though Putin bizarrely claimed they found grenade fragments and suggested Prigozhin's men were on drugs and accidentally detonated explosives. The mutiny was the greatest challenge to Putin's authority in 23 years, shattering his image as untouchable and revealing that the real threat came not from Western liberals, but from within his own system. Prigozhin survived the rebellion, but not its consequences, and the explosion 2 months later sent an unmistakable message about the price of challenging Putin's power. The man who projects invincibility is trapped in a system built on fear, and that fear is now eating the system from within. The question isn't whether Putin fears his own people, it's how long he can keep that fear from becoming reality. Vladimir Putin commands one of the most powerful militaries on Earth, but behind the scenes he is extremely insecure. He has 2 independent production teams, each one watching the other, each making sure he stays safe. In fact, he has people tasting his food before he eats it. This is because of the fear of getting poisoned. The man who projects absolute control lives in constant fear of assassination, and his terror runs far deeper than foreign enemies. His greatest fear is his own people. To the world, Russia appears as a resurgent superpower, aggressive and confident. But inside the Kremlin walls, the entire state operates from a place of profound paranoia. This fortress mentality drives every major decision, from foreign invasions to domestic crackdowns, and it's officially codified in Russian strategic documents. How long the Russian regime can hold this is something only time will tell.